An avoidant man goes days without texting anyone. He forgets to respond to his own mother sometimes. But there's a specific psychological shift you can create that turns that same man into someone who texts you first thing in the morning and calls you just to hear your voice at night. Today, I'm breaking down exactly how this happens. And the third thing I'm going to share is the one that feels completely backwards because it requires you to do less, not more. At the exact moment, every instinct in your body will be screaming at you to reach out first. If you've ever stared at your phone waiting for a text that took 3 days to come, comment the word waiting right now. Because what you're about to learn is going to explain exactly why that happened and exactly what makes it stop. Before we go further, I want 4 words typed below. Type the word initiate in the comments right now. This word matters because everything we're covering today is about flipping who initiates contact, moving it from you always reaching first to him genuinely wanting to reach first. Drop initiate now, because this shift in language reflects the exact shift we're about to create in his behavior. Let's start with why avoidant men don't text or call consistently in the first place. Because you cannot change a behavior you don't actually understand. An avoidant man's relationship with communication is fundamentally different from most people's. For a lot of people, texting someone regularly feels natural, feels like an easy way to maintain connection throughout the day. But for an avoidant man, initiating contact often carries an invisible weight. Somewhere in his development, expressing want, expressing need, reaching toward someone emotionally, got tangled up with vulnerability. And vulnerability, for someone with an avoidant attachment style, feels dangerous. It feels like exposure. It feels like handing someone a piece of ammunition they could later use against him. So when he doesn't text you first, it's rarely because he doesn't think about you. Research on attachment styles consistently shows that avoidant individuals often think about their partners just as much, sometimes even more, than anxiously attached individuals do. The difference isn't the thinking, it's the willingness to act on that thinking by reaching out. Reaching out means initiating vulnerability. And initiating vulnerability for him has probably historically led to feeling exposed, needy, or trapped. This is crucial to understand because it means the goal isn't to make him think about you more. He's probably already doing that. The goal is to remove the internal resistance that stops him from acting on those thoughts by actually picking up his phone and reaching out. Let's get into the first thing that creates this shift. The first thing is becoming an emotionally low maintenance presence in his life. This might sound counterproductive if you want more contact, but stay with me here because this is foundational. Avoidant men associate frequent contact in past relationships with obligation. If every text exchange eventually turns into a deeper conversation he wasn't ready for, if every call somehow ends with a discussion about the relationship, where things are going, how he's feeling, He starts to associate reaching out to you with walking into an emotional interrogation. Over time, his brain builds an association. Contact with her equals pressure. And so, to protect himself from that pressure, he starts avoiding initiating contact altogether. Because even the anticipation of that potential pressure is enough to make him hesitate. Becoming emotionally low maintenance means that when he does text or call, the interaction feels easy, light, enjoyable. It doesn't automatically spiral into a deep conversation about the relationship's status unless he's the one who brings that topic up. This doesn't mean you suppress your real feelings forever, or that serious conversations never happen. It means you're not turning every casual interaction into an opportunity to process the relationship. When texting, you start to feel like a break from the heaviness of life rather than an addition to it. His brain starts associating contact with you with relief instead of dread. And when something is associated with relief, people naturally want to return to it more often. The second thing is creating genuine, unpredictable, positive experiences when you are together or in contact. Avoidant men, despite the reputation, are not actually opposed to connection itself. What they're opposed to is connection that feels like a trap, connection with strings attached, connection where they feel monitored or controlled. What they respond to incredibly well is genuine, positive experiences that leave them wanting more, precisely because there's no attached pressure to want more. This means when you're together, whether in person or through calls and texts, the goal is to create moments that are genuinely enjoyable, funny, interesting, engaging on their own merit, not because you're performing to keep him interested, but because you're actually bringing energy and depth into the interaction. Share something interesting that happened in your day. Make an observation that makes him laugh. Ask a question that gets him actually thinking rather than just going through small talk motions. Here's why this matters so much for avoidant men specifically. Their nervous system, remember, is wired to associate emotional connection with eventual demand. When you consistently provide interactions that are engaging and enjoyable without pulling extra emotional weight from him, without needing him to perform reassurance, without needing constant validation, you become a genuinely positive experience in his life that exists without a hidden cost. And people, all people, avoidant or not, naturally gravitate toward positive experiences with no hidden cost attached. If you're seeing how this builds, comment the word gravity below. Because what we're really talking about here is becoming someone he gravitates toward naturally, rather than someone he feels obligated to check in with. The third thing, the one I mentioned at the start that feels completely backwards, is drastically reducing how often you initiate contact yourself. This is the part that feels almost impossible for a lot of people. Because when you like someone, when you're building something with them, every instinct tells you to reach out, to keep the connection alive, to make sure they know you're thinking about them. But with an avoidant man specifically, over-initiating contact can actually be the single biggest thing preventing him from ever initiating himself. Think about it from a basic behavioral standpoint. If you are always the one texting first, always the one calling first, always the one keeping the conversation going when it starts to lag, he never actually has to develop the habit or the internal motivation to reach out himself. Why would he? The connection is being maintained without any effort on his part. There's no gap for him to feel, no absence for him to notice, no space that makes him wonder what you're doing or whether you're thinking about him, because you've already answered all those questions by constantly being the one to initiate. When you drastically reduce your own initiation, something has to happen to fill that space. Either the connection genuinely fades because he wasn't that invested to begin with, which is important information you need to know, or if there was genuine interest and care underneath his avoidant patterns, he starts to notice the silence. He starts to notice your absence in his day. And here's the key part. Because you've spent time building genuine positive associations with contacting you through the low maintenance, high enjoyment interactions we already talked about, that noticing doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like missing something good. And missing something good is one of the few things powerful enough to override an avoidant man's resistance to initiating contact himself. This requires real patience on your part. You might go a day, sometimes several days, without initiating anything, and it will feel excruciating, especially if you're used to being the one who keeps things moving. But this discomfort is doing important work. It's creating the actual space required for him to step into the role of initiator, something he cannot do if that space is constantly filled by you. The fourth thing is responding to his contact in a way that reinforces rather than punishes his effort to reach out. This is subtle but incredibly important. Let's say you've successfully created space and he does text you first after a few quiet days. What happens next determines whether he continues doing this or retreats back into old patterns. If your response comes across as relieved, needy, or accusatory, something like, "Finally, I thought you forgot about me," or "Where have you been?" This literally punishes the exact behavior you're trying to reinforce. Even if these comments feel playful or lighthearted to you, to an avoidant man's already sensitive radar for pressure, they can read as, "See, reaching out leads to being questioned or made to feel guilty." And that association will make him hesitate the next time he considers initiating contact. Instead, when he does reach out, your response should feel warm, easy, and genuinely pleased, without heavy emotional weight attached. Something like responding with actual enthusiasm about whatever he shared, engaging naturally with the conversation, letting the interaction feel light and enjoyable, the same way we discussed earlier. This teaches his nervous system something crucial. Initiating contact with her leads to a good feeling, not an interrogation, not guilt, not pressure, just genuine, easy connection. Over time, this creates a positive reinforcement loop. He initiates, the experience feels good, he becomes more likely to initiate again in the future because his brain has now built a new association, one where reaching out to you results in pleasant feelings rather than the anticipated pressure his old patterns trained him to expect from closeness. The fifth thing, and this ties everything together, is becoming genuinely secure enough that his contact frequency doesn't determine your own emotional state. This might be the most important thing on this entire list, because everything else we've discussed only works if it comes from real internal security rather than a performed strategy. Avoidant men have finely tuned radar for detecting when someone's calm exterior is masking underlying anxiety or neediness. If you're technically doing all the right things, reducing your initiation, responding warmly when he reaches out, creating positive experiences, but internally you're anxious, checking your phone obsessively, feeling your mood shift dramatically based on whether he's texted that day, that underlying anxiety will eventually surface, whether through a slightly tense tone in your texts, a passive-aggressive comment when he doesn't reach out for a few days, or simply an energy that somehow makes its way into your interactions despite your best efforts to hide it. This is why the deepest work here isn't learning clever texting strategies. It's building genuine emotional regulation so that whether he texts you today or doesn't, your sense of self and your day-to-day happiness remain stable. This doesn't mean you don't care or that you pretend his contact doesn't matter to you at all. It means his contact becomes a wonderful addition to an already full life, rather than the missing piece that determines whether your day was good or bad. When you reach this level of genuine security, everything else becomes significantly easier, almost effortless. You don't have to force yourself to wait before texting back, because you're not anxiously waiting in the first place. You're just living your life and responding when it fits naturally into your day. You don't have to fake being unbothered when he goes quiet for a day or two, because you're actually genuinely occupied with things that matter to you. This is the version of you that avoidant men find almost impossible to resist reaching toward, because you represent something rare in their experience: closeness without pressure, connection without obligation, and warmth without the underlying anxiety that so often accompanies people who are chasing reassurance from them. When someone offers all of that, an avoidant man's psychological defenses, the very ones that keep him distant from almost everyone else, start to feel unnecessary around you specifically, because you're not triggering the threat response those defenses were built to protect against. Now, I want to address something important before we continue. Everything we've discussed works best in situations where there's already some level of genuine connection and care underneath the avoidant behavior. If you're doing all of this with someone who fundamentally isn't interested in you, no amount of low-maintenance energy or strategic spacing will manufacture interest that doesn't exist. These strategies remove obstacles for someone whose avoidance is rooted in fear of closeness, not in a lack of actual attraction or care. If you implement all of this consistently over a reasonable period, several weeks to a couple months, and you see absolutely no shift, no increased initiation, no signs of him leaning in even slightly, that's valuable information too. It might mean this particular dynamic isn't one where deepening is likely, and that's worth knowing so you can redirect your energy toward relationships that don't require this much strategic patience just to receive basic reciprocal effort. If you're recognizing patterns in your own relationship as I describe all this, comment the word recognize below, because understanding exactly where you are in this process helps you know what to focus on next. Let's talk about timeline, because this is something people often get wrong. They expect these shifts to happen within days, and when they don't see immediate results, they abandon the approach and go back to old patterns of over-initiating out of frustration or impatience. Realistically, if someone has spent years or even just months building an avoidant pattern in how they engage with relationships, that pattern doesn't dissolve in a week. The timeline for seeing genuine shifts in his initiation behavior typically ranges from a few weeks to a couple of months of consistent, patient application of everything we've covered. During this time, you'll likely see small signs before you see dramatic ones. Maybe he responds a bit faster than he used to. Maybe he asks a follow-up question instead of giving a one-word answer. Maybe he initiates once, then goes quiet again for several days before initiating a second time. These small increases matter. They're evidence that the underlying association is shifting, even if it hasn't fully solidified into consistent daily contact yet. Patience during this phase is genuinely difficult, especially because progress isn't linear. There will likely be days where it feels like everything's working perfectly, followed by days where he seems to retreat back into old patterns entirely. This isn't necessarily a sign of failure. Avoidant patterns don't disappear in a straight line. They fade gradually, with occasional reversions, especially during moments of external stress in his own life that have nothing to do with you specifically, but still trigger his old defensive patterns. I also want to mention something crucial about your role during this waiting period. This time isn't meant to be spent anxiously monitoring his behavior for signs of progress. It's meant to be spent genuinely building your own life, your own interests, your own sense of fulfillment that exists completely independent of his texting habits. Paradoxically, the more genuinely engaged you become with your own life during this process, the less it will feel like you're just waiting around for him to change, and the more naturally you'll embody the exact security that makes this entire process work in the first place. As this dynamic shifts, and if he does begin initiating contact more consistently, you might notice something interesting happening within yourself as well. The relationship starts to feel different, lighter somehow, because it's no longer built on your constant effort holding everything together. There's a mutuality developing that probably wasn't there before, and that mutuality tends to create a much more sustainable, much less exhausting dynamic than the one where you were always reaching, always wondering, always managing the emotional temperature of the connection by yourself. I want to leave you with one final thought before we wrap up. Everything we've covered today isn't really about manipulating someone into texting you more, even though that might be the surface level goal you came into this video with. At a deeper level, this is about creating a dynamic built on genuine safety and genuine reciprocity, rather than one built on anxious effort from one side and passive receiving from the other. When you build that kind of foundation, using everything we've discussed, low maintenance presence, genuine positive experiences, patient space, warm reinforcement, and real internal security, you're not just changing his texting habits. You're creating the actual conditions for a healthier, more balanced connection to exist between you. One where contact happens because both people genuinely want it, not because one person is desperately maintaining it while the other passively allows it to continue. If this video helped you understand what's actually happening in your dynamic, let me know in the comments which of these 5 things you're going to start focusing on first. Is it reducing how often you initiate contact? Is it becoming more emotionally low maintenance in your interactions? Is it working on your own internal security so his silence doesn't control your mood? Or is it learning to respond warmly instead of anxiously when he does reach out? Type the number below, 1 through 5, and I'll be reading through to see where everyone's starting from. If you know someone who's always the one texting first, always wondering why their avoidant partner never initiates, send them this video. Understanding the psychology behind this pattern is often the first step toward finally shifting a dynamic that's been one-sided for far too long. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns on avoidant attachment, relationship psychology, and how to build genuine connection with people whose defenses make closeness feel complicated. We're diving deep into this territory regularly because understanding these patterns doesn't just fix one relationship. It changes how you understand connection for the rest of your life. Drop your comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.